Welcome to Mindset and Stone podcasts, where we dive deep into the most compelling books on the shelf. Join hosts Dave and Poppy as they uncover the stories, themes, and ideas that shape our understanding and inspire curiosity. Get ready to explore the big ideas that leave a lasting impact. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Mindset and Stone podcast.
We are constantly barraged with this message that success is a singular thing.
It's this almost mythical event, a simple equation of, genius plus monumental grit equals greatness.
We celebrate the lone genius, the pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of person.
The self-made individual, the person who rose from nothing, based solely on their ambition. But what if that whole narrative is, fundamentally flawed?
That narrative, while it's inspiring, it's often blinding. Our mission today is to really look beyond that singular focus on just individual effort.
So we're doing a deep dive.
We're diving deep into sources that argue that exceptional achievement is, it's less about innate talent and more about this invisible web of hidden advantages.
Things like opportunity, culture, timing, even inherited mindsets.
Exactly. We're here to look at the forest, as our source material puts it, not just the tall trees.
And we want to give you, the listener, a new lens, a new way to view your own successes and the successes of the people around you.
It's about understanding the specific structural scaffolding that lifts certain individuals to the top.
So the goal is to synthesize these findings into something practical.
Right, a framework. We want to help you identify and maybe even seize the kind of systemic structural opportunities that lead to true mastery.
The core premise here is that where and when you were born,
The values passed down by your family.
and even the arbitrary rules of the game in your field.
All that is often more predictive of achievement than your IQ or, how hard you feel like you're working today.
It's about examining the soil and the sunlight.
Because that is the hidden architecture of achievement.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we'll start with a truly fascinating story that just perfectly illustrates how connected our well-being is to our environment.
We're starting in Roseto, Pennsylvania.
Right. Roseto was this small town founded in the late 19th century by Italian immigrants.
Specifically, they came from the Foggian province of Italy. And they were, for the most part, poor, barely literate.
And they were looking for work in the local slate quarries.
So what they lacked in wealth, they really made up for in community.
And the story of Roseto is it's astonishing. It baffled the American medical community for years.
It did. In the 1950s, a physician named Stuart Wolfe and sociologist John Brunn, they started investigating this tiny community.
And it was mainly because a local priest had mentioned something strange to Wolfe.
And that strangeness was this. Rosetans under the age of 55 had virtually zero heart disease. And their overall death rate from all causes was 30 to 35% lower than you would expect compared to the rest of the U.S.
At a time when heart attacks were the leading killer of American men, Rosetans just seemed to be immune.
And it wasn't just physical health, was it?
No. Brune, the sociologist, he tracked the behavioral data. He found almost no suicide, no alcoholism, no drug addiction.
And strikingly little crime.
They were truly dying of old age.
So the initial reaction, of course, was to look for individual factors.
Had to be genetics, right? Or maybe a pristine Mediterranean diet.
But Wolfe's deep dive, it revealed the complete opposite of a health paradise. These immigrants had very quickly adopted American habits.
They were cooking with lard instead of olive oil.
Dietitians found that a staggering 41% of their calories came from fat.
They smoked heavily. Many struggled with obesity. They were definitely not exercising or following some modern health regimen.
So that ruled out diet and lifestyle pretty much immediately.
Okay, so what about genetics?
Well, Wolfe did the painstaking work of tracking down relatives of Rosetans living in other parts of the United States.
Like in nearby Bangor and Nazareth, for instance.
And those relatives, they shared the same high rates of heart disease as other Americans. The advantage wasn't biological.
It was contained entirely within the town lines.
And this is where we get to the core insight. It wasn't the air or the water or the food.
It was the social environment.
Rosetans had successfully transplanted and preserved this powerful, protective social structure. The town was, for all intents and purposes, strictly for Rosetans.
They had 3 generational family meals, local bakeries, people constantly talking on their porches.
And they were economically self-sufficient. Crucially, within Roseto itself, there was this profound sense of equality.
Nobody showed off their success. Nobody felt the need to elevate themselves above their neighbors.
And this social structure, That was the medicine. It insulated them from the high levels of stress and status anxiety and social isolation that were becoming, you know, endemic in modern American life.
They didn't have high blood pressure because they didn't have that constant corrosive stress that comes from fighting for status and facing isolation.
They just had a reliable, unshakable support system.
The medical establishment at the time was entirely focused on the tree, right?
Exactly. Individual cholesterol levels, diet, exercise.
But Wolf and Bruin forced them to look beyond that and see the forest, the immense power of community structure.
The implication is just staggering. The strength of your social fabric can literally determine your longevity and your mental stability.
It's a huge reframing. We often think success and health are these solitary pursuits.
Roseto proves the opposite. Your greatest resource is often the community you invest in. If that structure is weak, everything else is just fighting an uphill battle against systemic stress.
Which brings us to our first takeaway. Practical takeaway 1. Focus on the forest, not the tree.
We need to recognize that our individual achievement and well-being are so heavily dependent on the strength of our community.
If you want sustainable success and health, you have to actively invest in strengthening those relationships. Build a protective social shield against external stress.
You should really treat your community involvement like preventative medicine.
Okay, so moving from the protective power of community, let's transition to something a bit more arbitrary.
An equally powerful structural advantage: timing. Specifically, the timing of your birth date.
And how it can create these massive unearned advantages in fields that demand early achievement.
We're talking about the famous analysis of elite Canadian hockey players.
Right, like the Medicine Hat Tigers and the shocking concentration of players born in the first 3 months of the year, January, February, or March.
When the psychologist Roger Barnsley looked at this data, he found that nearly 5.5 times as many players were born in January as were born in November.
It's a crazy statistic.
This phenomena, it's known as the relative age effect, and it reveals an iron law in how we develop talent in age-stratified systems.
And the explanation is disarmingly simple.
The eligibility cutoff date for age-class hockey in Canada is January 1st.
So if a child turns 10 on January 2nd, they're in the same league as a child who won't turn 10 until December 31st.
At age 9 or 10, that 12-month gap is a huge, immediate difference in physical maturity, size, coordination.
The January-born child is functionally a full year older than his December-born peer.
And this initial physical advantage, it triggers this viciously reinforcing cycle of opportunity that just compounds over time.
The slightly older, more mature boys get chosen for the all-star team, the rep squad, at that crucial age of 9 or 10. And once they're selected, they are streamed. They're physically separated from the kids who are deemed less talented.
And most critically, they receive a differentiated experience.
Better coaching, better facilities, way more practice time, higher quality competition.
Meanwhile, the December-born child, who might be just as talented but is simply less physically mature, is sent to a lower league with, mediocre coaching.
This is where the 10,000-hour rule really connects.
The January-born players get the extra high-quality practice they need to approach mastery years earlier than their peers.
They get a practice dividend, not because they are inherently better,
but because of an arbitrary bureaucratic cutoff date.
It's a pure environmental bias. And the source material shows this pattern holds true across sports with cutoff dates.
Right. In U.S. baseball, the cutoff is July 31st. So you find a disproportionate number of August birthdays in Major League Baseball.
In European soccer, the cutoff is often September 1st. So the September-born kids dominate.
And this structural bias, it's not just in athletics. It shows up dramatically in education.
Economists analyzing the TIMSS tests, that's the Trends in International Mathematics and Science study, found similar results.
The oldest children in any given fourth grade classroom, which is determined by the school's cutoff date, consistently scored between 4 and 12 percentile points higher than the youngest.
And that gap, 4 to 12 percentile points, that's often the difference between getting flagged for advanced programs versus being overlooked completely.
Teachers, unknowingly confuse maturity with ability early on.
And this leads to a systemic squandering of talent.
Think about the implication. The talent of nearly half the population in any system with a hard cutoff date is either overlooked or actively discouraged.
The system, which is designed for efficiency, becomes incredibly inefficient at spotting and nurturing potential.
So you have to ask, is this just luck? Or is it the predictable consequence of a poorly structured environment?
The evidence suggests if we wanted more high achievers, we'd just change the cutoff dates, or, like Denmark, delay ability grouping until kids are older.
Give everyone time to mature.
So this is our second big idea, practical takeaway 2. Audit your advantages and disadvantages.
You have to recognize that these arbitrary timing or selection cutoffs exist everywhere. School systems, professional development tracks, corporate promotion schedules.
So if you or your children are disadvantaged by timing, you need to be proactive.
Look for parallel tracks, alternative mentorship, or maybe just less restrictive fields where you can gain those necessary experience hours outside of the biased system.
Okay, moving beyond timing, let's talk about raw intelligence. We always assume a high IQ is the ultimate ticket to success.
But our sources introduce a major paradox here in the story of Christopher Langan.
This is a guy with an off-the-charts IQ, too high to be accurately measured. A brilliant autodidact who was reading advanced theoretical physics like Principia Mathematica at 16.
And yet, Langan struggled profoundly. Professionally, he failed institutionally and now lives on a horse farm in rural Missouri.
His life was just riddled with these administrative failures that derailed his academic potential. He lost his first university scholarship.
Simply because his mother failed to fill out the financial paperwork. A simple administrative failure.
Later, at Montana State, his car broke down and he needed a morning class moved to the afternoon.
And his advisor refused. Told him he had yet to learn that everyone has to make sacrifices.
So Langan, feeling this intense frustration with the unyielding system, just dropped out completely.
Now contrast that crippling failure, that inability to negotiate a simple schedule change,
with the experience of Robert Oppenheimer, the man who led the Manhattan Project.
While he was a graduate student at Cambridge, Oppenheimer, under intense psychological strain, tried to poison his tutor.
A criminal act.
And yet his parents, who were well-connected and wealthy, they intervened.
There were, as the source material says, protracted negotiations.
Oppenheimer was placed on probation, sent to a psychiatrist. He survived this catastrophic failure completely unscathed.
And decades later, despite having no administrative experience and a questionable past, he convinces General Leslie Groves to make him head of the world's most critical scientific job.
The difference between Langan and Oppenheimer wasn't genius. Both were prodigies.
The missing element was what psychologist Robert Sternberg calls practical intelligence.
It's the knowledge of how to operate systems, knowing what to say to whom, when to say it, and how to assert yourself effectively within these complex environments.
Oppenheimer was a master negotiator and self-advocate. Langan was crippled by his inability to engage constructively with authority.
And this practical intelligence, it's fundamentally taught through parental practice.
Middle-class families tend to practice something called concerted cultivation. They actively schedule their children. They engage them in reasoning.
And most crucially, they teach them to negotiate with authority, doctors, teachers, coaches.
This instills a sense of productive entitlement.
And we should emphasize, this is entitlement in the best, most practical sense of the word.
It's the belief that you have the right to assert your individual preferences and needs, respectfully and actively manage institutional outcomes.
The middle-class child learns the rules are negotiable, that if they speak up, they have a right to be heard.
There's that anecdote about the 9-year-old boy, Alex Williams, whose mother prepped him before a doctor's visit.
Right, to make sure he remembered to ask about some bumps under his arm.
And Alex, with total ease, interrupts the doctor, takes charge of the conversation, and shifts the power dynamic toward himself.
That skill is immensely valuable in a professional setting.
Conversely, poorer and working-class families often follow a strategy of accomplishment of natural growth.
They teach constraint, difference, and often a justified distrust of authority.
This was the exact legacy Langan inherited. He never had the opportunity to learn how to play the game of negotiation.
So when the system presented a challenge, his default and ultimately self-defeating response was withdrawal and rebellion.
Which gives us our next point. Practical takeaway 3. Cultivate entitlement, the good kind.
This means actively practicing assertive communication and self-advocacy in high-stakes settings.
Whether you're negotiating a raise, questioning a project's scope, or challenging an unfair bureaucratic decision.
You have to view these interactions as opportunities to shape outcomes, not just accept dictates.
Be comfortable articulating your needs clearly and respectfully. Know that you are worthy of adult attention and interest.
That is the skill that separates the surviving genius from the struggling prodigy.
And that skill of assertive engagement connects perfectly to our next subject.
Linking cultural capital, skill acquisition, and timing in the story of Joe Flom, the legendary lawyer who built the firm Skadden Arps.
Flom had the same initial disadvantages as Langen. He was poor, Jewish, came from an immigrant background in the 1940s and 50s.
The elite established white-shoe New York law firms run by patrician waspses. They wouldn't hire him.
His antecedents, as they called them, were all wrong. He was structurally locked out of the lucrative world of securities law.
This forced Flom and his colleagues to take the legal work the establishment firms considered, frankly, beneath contempt.
Litigation and, most critically, proxy fights, the messy, contentious legal maneuvers that came before hostile corporate takeovers.
The white-shoe firms saw this as ungentlemanly. They preferred elegant tax and estate planning.
So Flom perfected this niche craft. He spent 20 years toiling in the snake pit of contentious proxy battles.
He was forced into this specialty by discrimination, but he embraced the complexity. He put in his 10,000 hours in a disdained corner of the legal world.
Then the 1970s arrived.
And the rules of the American economy fundamentally changed. Easier borrowing, relaxed regulations. It meant hostile corporate takeovers exploded.
In frequency, in size, in financial importance.
And suddenly Flom's skills, once marginalized and despised, became the most valuable asset in corporate law.
He was the only one with decades of experience needed to navigate these high-stakes battles.
He wasn't just generally lucky. He was perfectly timed. His period of structural disadvantage forced him into a niche that, 20 years later, became the centerpiece of the global economy.
It's just like the rise of Bill Gates and Bill Joy, who toiled in obscure computer programming labs in the 70s.
Until the personal computer revolution arrived, making their specialized knowledge indispensable.
But the story goes deeper than just Joe Flom's timing. It's rooted in his cultural inheritance.
Flom was the son of garment workers. And to understand the cultural capital he benefited from, we have to look at earlier Jewish immigrants, like Louis and Regina Bourguignon.
They came to New York in 1889.
And these Jewish immigrants often brought with them highly specific urban trade skills from Europe.
The Bourguignons were proficient in what the source material calls Schnittwarenhandlung, the skilled trades related to clothing and textiles.
They arrived precisely when the New York garment industry was undergoing explosive growth. They didn't have to learn farming or totally new processes. They leveraged an existing, highly valued skill set.
And the work itself, despite the notorious conditions, we're talking 84-hour weeks sometimes, provided a crucial, positive cultural inheritance.
The concept of meaningful work.
Louis Bourguignon, who started by sewing children's aprons with his wife, found satisfaction because his work had the three essential qualities of fulfillment.
And those three pillars are autonomy. He was his own boss, charting his own course.
Complexity, he had to master market research, sourcing, manufacturing, negotiation.
And a clear connection between effort and reward. The longer and harder he and Regina sewed, the more money they made the next day.
This self-directed, complex, rewarding experience, that was the essential lesson passed down to their children.
The garment industry was, in effect, a rigorous boot camp for the professions.
It taught the next generation, who became doctors and lawyers, that success comes from diligent, creative initiative, and that effort directly translates into control over your destiny.
This is the bedrock of that good entitlement Flom needed to thrive.
Which brings us to our fourth takeaway, practical takeaway 4. Seek meaningful work.
If you have the flexibility, structure your work life to maximize autonomy, complexity, and that direct link between effort and reward.
These factors are far more critical to fulfillment and long-term mastery than just focusing on income or status.
And if your current role lacks these, find a side project or professional hobby where you are the autonomous, complex problem solver.
So if the garment industry taught empowerment and initiative, our next section shows what happens when a powerful cultural legacy teaches the exact opposite.
Deference, constraint, and the avoidance of direct communication.
We're going to examine high-stakes environments now, specifically analyzing catastrophic aviation accidents.
These crashes are rarely caused by a single technical failure. They're almost always caused by an accumulation of human errors, often 7 consecutive errors.
And they're related almost universally to failures in teamwork and communication.
We can look at the chilling case of Avianca Flight 052 in 1990, which ran out of fuel while in a holding pattern, waiting to land at JFK.
The Colombian flight crew failed to communicate their critical fuel state effectively to New York Air Traffic Control.
The captain eventually screams, "Tell them we are in an emergency."
But the first officer, Mauricio Klotz, constrained by decades of cultural programming, used what's called mitigated speech.
Instead of using the mandatory direct word emergency, Klotz replied to ATC by saying things like, "That's right to 180 on the heading, and we'll try once again. We're running out of fuel."
He hid the most critical piece of information.
Mitigation is the act of downplaying or sugarcoating what you're saying, often to avoid offending a superior.
And Klotz hid running out of fuel at the end of a routine sentence, cushioned by that little
The New York controllers, operating at a very different low PDI culture, completely missed the hint.
Their assumption is that if a pilot has a critical problem, they are expected to state it directly and assertively.
They just interpreted the transmission as an inconvenience, not a catastrophe about to happen.
And this cultural legacy can be measured using Geert Hofstede's Power Distance Index, or PDI.
It measures how much a culture respects and accepts inequality and hierarchy.
High PDI cultures, like Colombia and South Korea, rely heavily on mitigated speech. Subordinates are conditioned to fear challenging a superior's judgment.
And Colombia scores very high on the PDI.
The consequences were devastating. You can see it in the transcript. At one point, after failing to convey the seriousness, the captain asks what the controller said.
And Klotz replies, "The guy is angry."
He was prioritizing his perception of the controller's emotional state, the fear of conflict over the imminent disaster. He was trapped.
This same dynamic explained the terrible safety record of Korean Air in the 80s and 90s.
South Korea also has an extremely high PDI.
Crashes were repeatedly linked to first officers using profound mitigation toward the captain.
Like a first officer might say, "Captain, the weather radar has helped us a lot on previous occasions."
What he really meant was, "You are flying us straight into a massive thunderstorm, and we are all going to die if you don't turn right now."
The solution was revolutionary. A cultural transformation led by a Delta manager named David Greenberg.
He implemented mandatory crew resource management, or CRM. They forced pilots to abandon their cultural legacy in the cockpit and adopt clear, assertive communication.
And critically, they sometimes required the pilots to switch to speaking English.
Which, unlike Korean, lacks the deep, formal linguistic structures that reinforce hierarchy.
This institutional change was a deliberate act of renorming. It gave the pilots an alternative professional identity.
It freed them from the constraint of their inherited communication style.
The success was immediate and undeniable. Korean Air went from being a dangerous global outlier to having a spotless safety record.
This powerfully demonstrates that while cultural legacies are pervasive, they're not indelible. They can be overcome through deliberate, systemic change.
This leads to practical takeaway 5, combat mitigation, CRM for life.
You need to adopt clear, direct, and assertive language in all high-stakes professional communication.
It doesn't matter what your cultural background is or the seniority of the person you're speaking to.
Do not rely on superiors to interpret hints or read between the lines. In critical situations, the responsibility for clarity lies entirely with the speaker.
Use challenge phrases like, "I have a concern about X," or "I propose an immediate alternative to Y."
So we wrap up our deep dive by exploring one final, powerful cultural legacy.
The work ethic rooted in the history of the rice paddies of Asia, which provides a structural understanding of the well-documented Asian academic advantage.
There's a small linguistic advantage. Asian number words are shorter, so it's easier to retain them in short-term memory, but the true advantage is structural.
And it's rooted in wet rice cultivation.
Unlike the extensive, mechanically oriented farming of the West, rice farming is immensely labor-intensive.
We're talking up to 3,000 hours per year of meticulous, detailed labor.
Compare that to around 1,200 hours for a typical Western peasant farmer of the past.
Rice farming requires planning, diligence, precision, and the relationship between effort and reward is immediate and direct.
If you work harder, you harvest more.
And this system fostered a profound cultural belief that persistence and effort are always rewarded.
There's a Chinese proverb, "No one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich."
This is in stark contrast to Western agrarian history, where fields were often left fallow and there was little productive work during the deep winter months.
And this cultural contrast highlights a crucial disadvantage embedded in the Western education system: the long summer break.
The concept of 2 or 3 months off is a legacy of that fallow agrarian calendar. It's rooted in the belief that the mind, like a field, must lie fallow to prevent overstimulation.
This is not just a historical curiosity. It is a live structural inequality.
Research tracking Baltimore students, for instance, showed that virtually all of the achievement gap between wealthy and poor students resulted from learning loss during the long summer break.
Not from failure during the school year itself.
Wealthier children kept learning through summer camps, reading, structured activities, a continuation of that concerted cultivation we talked about.
While poorer children lost months of knowledge due to a lack of structure and resources.
And that structural timing disadvantage is exactly what the KPP Academy in the South Bronx was built to solve.
KPP The Knowledge is Power Program achieved phenomenal results.
Their low-income students outperformed wealthy suburban students in math by the end of 8th grade.
And it wasn't through some genius curriculum. It was by systematically replacing the fallow agrarian calendar with a rice paddy work ethic.
They did this by eliminating the traditional summer break and radically extending the school day.
KPP students are on a rigorous schedule, 7 to 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., plus Saturday classes and 3 extra weeks in July.
This provides the sheer time required for mastery.
This is the story of Marita's bargain. Marita, a KPP student, wakes up at 5:45 a.m., and often finishes her homework around 10 p.m.
Her life is intense. She's sacrificing short-term social freedom for long-term opportunity.
But this structure provides the necessary time, the 10,000 hours of concentrated learning that her environment had previously denied her.
She is intentionally building the cultural capital that others inherited for free.
Her former friends were discouraged by the time commitment, but Marita understands the value proposition.
She didn't need a higher IQ or better facilities. She needed a structured chance to practice meaningful, complex work with a clear connection between her tremendous effort and her educational reward.
Which brings us to our final takeaway. Practical takeaway 6. Commit to the 10,000-hour schedule.
You have to recognize that mastery requires intense, focused time investment.
And if your environment or cultural legacy hasn't provided the necessary opportunities, the right birth date, the right parenting style, the right school calendar, you have to proactively make a bargain, like Marita.
Be willing to put in significantly longer, dedicated hours like the Beatles in Hamburg or Bill Gates in the computer lab to close that experience gap.
Time intentionally invested is the great equalizer.
What a profound journey. We began by questioning the myth of the self-made genius.
And we finish realizing that success is the predictable product of specific, identifiable advantages and inheritances.
Ranging from the arbitrary luck of a January birth date to inherited negotiation styles to economic timing and these deep-seated cultural beliefs about work and communication.
But the most empowering lesson from all these stories, Rossetto, Flom, the Korean pilots, and Marita, is that these systems, these forests, they are not fixed.
They are mechanisms of achievement that can be engineered.
Korean Air fixed its culture. KIPP fixed the school calendar.
We can choose to be passive recipients of our inherited architecture, or we can choose to be active architects of our own environment.
If Bill Gates was one of, maybe 50 teenagers in the world who had unlimited access to a time-sharing terminal in 1968.
What breakthroughs are we missing today because only 50 people have access to the necessary structural advantage?
Our collective goal should be to replace that patchwork of lucky breaks and arbitrary advantages with a society that intentionally provides meaningful opportunities for all.
Marita didn't need a genius IQ. She just needed a little bit of the highly structured, highly rewarded rice paddy work structure brought to the South Bronx.
So your challenge today is to reflect deeply on the powerful influence of the forest in your own life.
What aspect of your culture, your environment, or your inherited communication style, whether it's high mitigation, a limiting selection rule, or a calendar constraint, might be limiting your potential?
We challenge you to identify one arbitrary disadvantage in your life or organization, whether it's a selection rule, a timing constraint, or a cultural bias, and explore how changing that underlying system could unlock fulfillment and achievement for you and those around you.
Go beyond individual effort and start fixing the system.
We hope you're leaving with fresh insights and a spark of inspiration. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and check back for more episodes as we dive into new worlds of thought, one book at a time. Until then, keep your mind set in stone and your curiosity open. This has been a Big L Riz Media podcast, where big ideas meet lasting impressions.